You never truly know the man you married for 9 years until you watch him throw you away. When my husband dragged his 26-year-old mistress into our kitchen, weaponizing her father's wealth to intimidate me, he thought he held all the winning cards. He believed he was discarding a docile, helpless tech drone. He had absolutely no idea he was clutching a live grenade with the pin pulled, completely blind to who truly owned this city. Hello, everyone. Before today's story begins, we'd like to share a quick message. YouTube recently removed our monetization, cutting off our income. If you enjoy this story, we humbly ask for just $1 to help pay our staff so they can make a living and keep creating for you. Thank you for saving us. Now, let's begin the story. My name is Brooklyn Munoz. It was late on a Friday night in Austin, Texas. The suffocating summer heat pressed heavily against the thick glass of our living room windows. But inside, the central air conditioning hummed a steady, frigid rhythm. I was 36 years old, sitting silently at the kitchen island, running a diagnostic scan on a highly complex string of back-end code. The soft blue glow of the dual monitors was the only light source illuminating the dark room. Then, the brass lock of the front door clicked open. It was not just my husband of 9 years, Julian, stepping into the slate-tiled foyer. The heavy, unmistakable scent of an overpowering, custom-blended floral perfume invaded the sterile, quiet air of my home before she even stepped into my line of sight. Julian walked into the kitchen. He was not alone, and he made no effort to hide it. Trailing closely behind him was Chloe Sterling. She was 26 years old, draped in a vibrant, asymmetrical silk dress that screamed of generational wealth and a desperate, clawing need for external validation. She looked around my pristine kitchen with the casual, assessing gaze of a real estate developer surveying a tear-down property. There was absolutely no trace of guilt on Julian's face. His shoulders were pulled back in an exaggerated, stiff posture of dominance. It was a classic, transparent compensation mechanism I had seen him deploy countless times whenever he felt intellectually outmatched or deeply insecure. He stopped at the edge of the granite counter, looking down at me with cold, unfamiliar eyes. "I need you to pack your things and move out by the end of the week," Julian said. His voice was steady, meticulously rehearsed. "Chloe and I are getting engaged. We want to start our life here." He was standing in the center of the home we had been paying off for nearly a decade, casually demanding the keys so his new prize could play house. I did not scream. I did not throw the ceramic coffee mug resting near my keyboard. I did not cry. My brain, wired and rigorously trained as a systems architect, immediately detached from the sudden emotional shockwave. My limbic system shut down the panic response, and my prefrontal cortex shifted into a clinical, analytical diagnostic mode. I began to process the variables. Julian was a coward wrapped in a fragile layer of borrowed confidence. I noticed how he was leaning slightly toward Chloe, using her as a subconscious physical tether. He was drawing his newfound, abrasive authority entirely from her presence and the phantom weight of her family's bank accounts. Chloe, meanwhile, was practically glowing with toxic superiority, her chin tilted upward at an aggressive angle. "Look, Brooklyn," Julian continued, his tone shifting from authoritative to menacingly practical. "Chloe's father owns half this city. Do not make things complicated if you want to live peacefully in Austin. Just take whatever minimal cash settlement my lawyer offers and walk away quietly. Do not fight me on this." Chloe stepped forward, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, intentionally disrupting the quiet space. She reached up to her wrist, slowly unclasping a thick, diamond-encrusted tennis bracelet. With a deliberate, theatrical motion, she let it drop onto my kitchen counter. It landed with a heavy metallic clink right next to my legal pad. It was a primitive, primate-like display of territorial marking, attempting to establish dominance through material worth. "Accept reality, sweetie," Chloe said, flashing a pitying, tight-lipped smile that did not reach her eyes. "Julian is moving into a completely different tier of society now. You simply do not fit the aesthetic anymore. Sell the bracelet. buy yourself something nice to ease the transition. Without waiting for a single word of response from me, Julian placed a protective hand on the small of her back, guiding her back toward the foyer. They were heading out to a high-end dinner reservation, eager to celebrate their triumphant little ambush. The heavy front door shut behind them, locking with a definitive, echoing click. The silence poured back into the house, heavier and colder than before. I remained seated perfectly still at the kitchen island. I did not immediately start searching the internet for an aggressive divorce attorney. I did not reach for my smartphone to call a friend and weep into the receiver. Instead, I reached down into my leather briefcase resting on the floor and pulled out my secondary laptop. It was a heavy matte black machine with zero manufacturer logos or identifying serial numbers. I flipped the screen open. The machine did not boot to a standard commercial operating system. It bypassed all graphical interfaces, opening directly to a stark, black command terminal. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with practiced precision, entering a randomized, 64-character encryption key entirely from memory. The system rapidly bypassed 3 distinct corporate firewalls, routing my secure connection through encrypted proxy servers bouncing from Zurich to Singapore, before finally establishing a direct, untraceable uplink. I was not logging in to check a joint checking account. I was accessing a military-grade encrypted server framework. A secure text interface materialized on the screen, establishing a direct line to an anonymous, shadow board of directors. The flashing white cursor waited for my input. I began to type my situational report. Julian firmly believed he was discarding a docile, helpless, mid-level tech drone who had no safety net. He had absolutely no idea who I really was. He was entirely blind to the sheer magnitude of the financial empire that stood silently behind me, waiting in the dark for my command. The next morning at exactly 8:30, I walked through the heavily fortified glass doors of Aetherus Dynamics. The corporate headquarters occupied the top 15 floors of a steel and glass monolith in downtown Austin. To the oblivious receptionists, the security guards scanning my biometric data, and my immediate project managers, I was merely a reliable, mid-level systems consultant. I was the woman who wore unassuming gray suits, drank plain black coffee, and quietly collected a yearly salary of $140,000. They saw a predictable worker bee. They were blissfully unaware that the Munoz family, operating out of a heavily guarded compound in Miami, entirely funded and controlled Aetherus Dynamics through an impenetrable labyrinth of offshore holding companies. I did not just work in this building. My bloodline owned the structural integrity of the walls, the subterranean servers humming beneath our feet, and every single classified patent filed in the legal department. I settled into my ergonomic chair and booted up my workstation. Before I initiated my daily security sweeps for our corporate clients, I opened an isolated browser to monitor the public fallout of my marriage. Julian had not wasted a single minute. Over the past 12 hours, he had orchestrated a vicious, highly calculated smear campaign across every social media platform and professional networking circle in Texas. He was furiously constructing a narrative to justify his sudden pivot to a wealthy heiress. Reading his posts was like studying a masterclass in narcissistic projection. He utilized every hollow buzzword popular in the Austin tech scene, describing himself as a disruptive visionary who had been tragically tethered to a deeply paranoid, emotionally unstable partner. He carefully fabricated anecdotes about my supposed insane jealousy and erratic behavior, claiming I was actively sabotaging his mental health and his groundbreaking career. He framed his infidelity not as a betrayal, but as an act of vital self-preservation, publicly presenting Chloe Sterling as his brilliant, stabilizing muse. It was a nauseating performance, yet the local entrepreneurial echo chamber devoured it. I watched his follower count rise by the thousands, his peers flooding the comment sections with blind support and congratulations on his newly announced venture. I closed the social media tabs, feeling nothing but a clinical, icy detachment. If Julian was parading around town as the next great tech titan, I needed to dissect the foundation of his sudden empire. I activated a highly restricted protocol on my terminal. accessing Atheros Dynamics' deep web data retrieval instruments. Julian had recently registered a brand new startup, boldly claiming an initial market valuation of $15 million. For a man whose technical expertise peaked at organizing spreadsheet macros, this was an impossible leap. I initiated a stealth packet inspection aimed directly at his company's newly provisioned cloud servers. His security measures were laughable, purchased off the shelf, and hastily configured. It took my proprietary algorithms exactly 3 minutes and 45 seconds to slice through his firewalls and mirror his entire central database onto my secure local drive. When I opened his primary source code directory, the breath caught in my throat. The screen was filled with elegant, devastatingly familiar lines of logic. It was a highly sophisticated artificial intelligence core designed for macro-level predictive modeling. It was beautiful, complex, and entirely mine. Julian had not written a single line of it for the last 3 years, during the quiet weekends while he was out supposedly networking. I had painstakingly engineered this algorithm from scratch as a personal intellectual exercise. It was designed to optimize municipal power grids and automated traffic flows in real time. He had waited until I was asleep, bypassed my home network router, and silently cloned my entire private repository onto his own encrypted drive. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as the sheer gravity of his stupidity washed over me. I began cross-referencing his corporate tax filings and investor portfolios. The truth was far worse than petty theft. Julian had taken my proprietary engine and used it as the foundational asset to secure a massive, multi-million-dollar venture capital loan directly from Marcus Sterling, Chloe's father. He had pitched a revolutionary smart city initiative, promising the Sterling real estate empire a technology that could double the efficiency of their commercial properties. Julian had unknowingly transformed himself from an unfaithful husband into a major federal criminal. He had committed gross corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and interstate wire fraud. He had defrauded a notorious real estate tycoon by leveraging an asset that legally belonged to a defense contracting entity effectively owned by the Munoz family. He was sitting on a ticking nuclear warhead, mistaking it for a throne. Standard protocol dictated that I immediately dispatch a team of corporate lawyers to freeze his assets and file federal charges. But exposing him now would only result in a messy, protracted legal battle where he might salvage some sympathy. I needed him to feel invincible. I needed him to sprint blindly toward the edge of the cliff. I picked up my phone and composed a text message to his personal number. I intentionally abandoned my usual precise grammar, using erratic spacing to simulate panic and emotional devastation. Julian, please, I saw what you posted online. I am so incredibly sorry for holding you back all these years. You are right about everything. Please, I am begging you. Just do not force me out of the house this week. I have absolutely no money saved and nowhere else to go. We can handle this quietly. Please just give me a little more time to pack. I hit send. I watched the tiny indicator confirm the message was read almost instantly. By feeding him this pathetic display of surrender, I was handing him the ultimate illusion of total victory. I wanted him to believe he had completely broken me, so that he would never look down and notice the snare tightening permanently around his throat. I booked a seat on a red-eye flight out of Austin that same evening. Landing in the humid, thick air of Miami just before 3 o'clock in the morning, I bypassed the main terminal entirely, stepping off the private tarmac directly into a waiting black sports utility vehicle. The driver took me straight to the financial district of Brickell. My destination was a monolithic, unmarked high-rise that housed Munoz Capital. To the public eye, Munoz Capital did not exist. To the hyper-elite, it was a terrifying shadow fund, a financial predator that specialized in quietly acquiring the distressed, toxic debt of over-leveraged billionaires and slowly tightening the noose. My uncle, Alejandro Munoz, was waiting for me in the top-floor conference room. He was a man composed of sharp angles and absolute ruthlessness, sitting at the head of a massive mahogany table. He poured 2 glasses of neat bourbon as I entered. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I handed him a decrypted flash drive containing the complete corporate profile of Marcus Sterling. I need a complete forensic autopsy on the Sterling real estate portfolio, I told him, taking a sip of the burning liquid. And I need it done before the sun comes up. Alejandro signaled to his team of unseen analysts operating in the adjoining glass-walled rooms. For the next 3 hours, I sat beside my uncle, watching the monitors on the wall display a rapid, surgical deconstruction of Chloe's father. The internal due diligence sweep brought back a revelation so profoundly ironic that a cold smile actually cracked across my face. Marcus Sterling was not a titan of industry. He was a dying man thrashing in the water, desperately trying to keep his head above the surface. His entire empire was constructed on a crumbling foundation of mezzanine loans, balloon payments, and severely inflated property valuations. He was bleeding cash at an exponential rate. But the true masterpiece of this financial autopsy was the identity of his primary executioner. According to the deeply buried ledgers, Marcus Sterling had recently restructured his massive debt to avoid total bankruptcy. The primary creditor who had purchased those distressed corporate bonds was a private equity shell company operating out of the Cayman Islands. That shell company was a direct subsidiary of Munoz Capital. My family secretly owned precisely 70% of the total debt holding up the Sterling empire. If my uncle decided to snap his fingers, Chloe and her arrogant father would be evicted from their penthouses and left with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The entire picture snapped into terrifying, crystalline focus. Marcus Sterling was not investing in Julian because he believed in my husband's non-existent genius. Marcus was drowning, and he needed a revolutionary narrative to parade in front of foreign institutional investors. He was using Julian's stolen smart city artificial intelligence project as a shiny, fraudulent lure to raise fresh capital. Marcus intended to use that new money to pay off the interest on his existing debt to us. It was a classic, desperate shell game. My cheating husband was unwittingly acting as the frontman for a massive financial fraud scheme, attempting to scam the very family he was currently betraying. I set my empty glass down on the mahogany table. The room was perfectly silent. "Do you want me to liquidate them today?" Alejandro asked, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "I can freeze their accounts by 8 o'clock this morning. I can leave the boy with nothing." "No," I replied softly. "A sudden bankruptcy is a tragedy. People pity tragedies. I want a public execution. I want them to build their entire future on this project. And then I want to rip the floorboards out from under them while the whole world is watching." I opened my laptop right there in the boardroom. Accessing the Aetherius Dynamics mainframe via a highly classified administrative portal, I located the exact directory of the stolen code Julian was currently integrating into the Sterling presentation servers. I did not delete the code. Instead, I wove a beautiful, invisible trap directly into the central nervous system of the software. I engineered a sophisticated backdoor trigger, a fatal logic bomb buried beneath thousands of lines of benign commands. It was designed to remain entirely dormant, allowing the software to function flawlessly during all of their internal testing and preliminary demonstrations. But the moment I sent a specific, encrypted ping from my terminal, the backdoor would forcefully rip open. The algorithm would cannibalize itself, instantly bypassing all user interfaces to broadcast the original, undeniable Aetherius Dynamics copyright certificates and my own digital signature across every connected display. I held the absolute power to detonate his stolen empire with a single keystroke. I closed my laptop and looked back at my uncle. "Draft the immediate margin call execution documents for every single asset the Sterling family owns," I instructed him. "Prepare the liens on their commercial properties, their residential estates, and their private accounts, but do not file them. Keep the paperwork in a sealed briefcase and have your senior legal counsel on standby in Austin. Wait for my exact signal." Alejandro nodded, a glint of dark pride shining in his eyes. As I rode the elevator down to the waiting vehicle, I thought about Julian. He was probably waking up right now in a luxury hotel suite with Chloe, checking his phone, feeling utterly powerful as he read my pathetic, pleading text messages. He genuinely believed I was sitting in our dark kitchen, crying over the loss of my mortgage payments, The contrast was almost poetic. He was playing a petty, vicious little game of domestic bullying, completely unaware that he had just stumbled onto a chessboard where I commanded every single piece. I had quietly surrounded his pathetic illusion with an inescapable cage of absolute, crushing reality. The hunt was over. All that remained was the slaughter. 2 weeks later, the absurd theater of Julian and Chloe reached its absolute peak. They orchestrated a massive, aggressively publicized press conference in the center of downtown Austin to officially announce their joint venture. They were suddenly everywhere I looked. I walked past newsstands and saw their heavily airbrushed faces plastered across the glossy covers of local business magazines, heralded loudly as the brilliant new power couple of the Texas tech scene. The accompanying articles gushed endlessly about their revolutionary synergy, an entire narrative completely manufactured by high-priced public relations firms paid for with Marcus Sterling's rapidly evaporating lines of credit. Chloe was always photographed clinging to his arm, wearing thousands of dollars in designer clothing, while Julian stared into the camera lenses with the manufactured intensity of a modern visionary. The ultimate display of his arrogance arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. A bonded corporate courier walked into the heavily secured lobby of Aetherus Dynamics and delivered a thick, wax-sealed envelope directly to my desk. Inside was a heavy, gold-foiled invitation to the grand launch gala of the Smart City project. It was a calculated, vicious psychological insult, a deliberate attempt to rub his supposed triumph right in my face in my own place of professional sanctuary. Tucked beneath the lavish invitation was a dense stack of legal documents. It was a finalized divorce settlement, aggressively drafted by a notoriously ruthless local attorney. The terms were brutally one-sided. The document demanded I walk away with a single, insulting payout of exactly $30,000 in exchange for completely forfeiting any claim to our shared home, his new company, and all marital assets acquired over the last 9 years. I did not call my lawyer. I did not throw the documents into the shredder. Instead, I sent Julian a simple calendar invite to a small, unremarkable coffee shop on the desolate outskirts of the city for the following morning. It was a drab, poorly lit establishment that smelled heavily of burnt espresso beans and cheap industrial floor cleaner. It was a stark, intentional contrast to the glittering, artificial world he now occupied. He arrived exactly 15 minutes late, executing a classic, transparent power play. He walked through the door wearing a bespoke navy suit that easily cost more than his first car, repeatedly checking a heavy gold watch as he slid into the cramped vinyl booth across from me. He looked at the chipped formica table with undisguised, theatrical disgust. "Make this quick, Brooklyn," Julian commanded, not bothering to lower his voice for the other patrons. "I have a critical board meeting with Marcus at noon, and I absolutely do not have the time or the patience for a weeping session." I looked at him. I really, truly looked at the man I had shared a bed with for nearly a decade. Beneath the expensive fabric and the borrowed bravado, he was painfully small. I decided to offer him one final, infinitesimal sliver of mercy, a single, fleeting chance to step off the tracks before the freight train completely vaporized him. "Julian," I said, my voice perfectly quiet and entirely flat, "I want to ask you a very simple question. Do you truly understand the complex core mechanics of the technology you are about to present to the world? And more importantly, do you have any actual idea where the Sterling family is getting the liquidity to fund your venture?" He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. It was loud and abrasive enough that the barista behind the counter looked over in alarm. "Are you seriously trying to play the concerned wife right now?" Julian sneered, leaning aggressively across the table. The heavy scent of his expensive cologne clashed violently with the stale air of the cafe, creating a nauseating combination. "You are so incredibly pathetic. You are sitting here in this depressing little diner, completely consumed by your own jealousy. I am building an absolute empire. Brooklyn, I am a visionary. Chloe actually understands my genius. She is a woman who operates on my level, a woman who is actually worthy of the empire I am creating. You are just a bitter, obsolete consultant who cannot handle the simple fact that I completely outgrew you. That was the exact moment the final, lingering microscopic trace of pity inside my chest completely evaporated. The temperature in my eyes dropped to absolute zero. He was not just a fool. He was a willing parasite fiercely defending the dying host he was actively helping to kill. The final warning had been completely ignored, the sentence was officially mandated, and the execution was greenlit. "I understand," I replied softly. I reached into my structured leather bag and pulled out the thick stack of divorce papers he had sent to my office. I placed them carefully on the sticky table between us. Julian smiled, a wide, predatory grin spreading across his face. He genuinely assumed he had finally battered me into total, humiliating submission. He reached into his breast pocket and handed me a heavy silver fountain pen. I took the pen and deliberately turned to the final signature page. I stared at the dotted line for a brief second. Then, I signed my name. However, I did not sign my actual legal name. I consciously and deliberately altered the entire structural integrity of the signature. I swapped my middle initial, transformed the sharp, distinct loop of the letter B into an open, sloppy curve, and entirely omitted the legal hyphenation of my maiden name. To the naked eye, or to an arrogant man rushing blindly to his own coronation, it looked like a messy, tear-stained scrawl of defeat. In the eyes of a federal bankruptcy court or a high-level civil litigation judge, it was an entirely invalid, legally non-binding forgery. It was a tiny, microscopic flaw, but it was the absolute perfect legal failsafe that ensured I retained my ironclad marital rights to every single thing he was about to destroy. I pushed the heavy stack of papers across the table. Julian snatched them up immediately, not even bothering to glance at the wet ink. "Good," he said, standing up abruptly and buttoning his suit jacket with a final, dismissive gesture. "Do not ever contact me again." I sat in silence and watched him walk out of the coffee shop, stepping confidently into the glaring Texas sun. I picked up my plain black coffee, took a slow, deliberate sip, and smiled. The grand launch gala for the Smart City Initiative took place on the 75th floor of the Zenith Tower, the single most expensive piece of commercial real estate in downtown Austin. The venue was a sprawling expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a dizzying 360-degree view of the city lights below. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with the absolute highest echelon of Texas society. The mayor was holding court near the platinum-plated open bar, surrounded by eager city council members. Dozens of major institutional investors and aggressive venture capitalists circled the room like well-dressed sharks, clutching flutes of vintage champagne. Flashbulbs from the invited tech media exploded in rapid succession, capturing every manufactured moment of the evening. The air was thick, heavy with the suffocating mixture of exotic floral centerpieces, expensive designer perfumes, and the palpable, vibrating hum of blind greed. It felt less like a celebration and more like a heavily decorated pressure cooker. I arrived exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes after the doors officially opened. I did not wear a flowing evening gown or anything remotely resembling the glittering, asymmetrical silk dress Chloe had worn to my kitchen. Instead, I wore a bespoke, razor-sharp suit, tailored from jet-black Italian wool. The cut was aggressive and perfectly structured, devoid of any softening frills or distracting jewelry. I wore black leather stiletto heels that struck the polished marble floor with the precise, rhythmic cadence of a metronome ticking down to an explosion. As I stepped out of the private elevator and into the main ballroom, the psychological shift in the room was immediate. The local entrepreneurs and social climbers who had spent the last 2 weeks eagerly consuming and sharing Julian's vicious online smear campaign recognized me instantly. However, instead of the erratic, hysterical woman they expected to see, they were confronted by an aura of absolute, freezing authority. Conversations abruptly died. People instinctively stepped backward, parting like the Red Sea to carve a clear path for me through the dense crowd. Julian was standing near the center of the room, posing for a photograph with Chloe and her father, Marcus Sterling. He caught sight of me over the photographer's shoulder, The manufactured, confident smile instantly collapsed from his face, replaced by a sudden, violent flash of sheer panic. He whispered something frantically into Chloe's ear, dropped his champagne flute onto a passing waiter's tray, and marched directly toward me. "What are you doing here?" Julian hissed, his voice trembling with barely suppressed rage as he blocked my path. His face was flushing a deep, ugly shade of crimson. "Are you completely insane? I specifically told you to take the settlement and disappear. You are trespassing at a private, highly secured corporate event." He did not wait for my response. He frantically waved his hand in the air, signaling to the towering head of building security who was patrolling the perimeter, the security director, a broad-shouldered man with a tactical earpiece and a grim expression, quickly closed the distance between us. "Remove this woman immediately," Julian barked, his voice cracking slightly as he pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "She is not on the guest list. She is my unstable ex-wife, and she is attempting to disrupt a multi-million-dollar presentation." The security director stopped precisely 2 feet away from us. He did not reach for my arm. He did not ask for my identification. His tactical earpiece was directly connected to the building's central command system, a system fully integrated and ultimately managed by the overarching security grid of Aetherus Dynamics. He recognized my facial biometric profile instantly. The director looked at Julian with blank indifference, then turned his entire body toward me. He planted his feet together, placed his hands behind his back, and bowed his head in a deep, highly disciplined gesture of absolute respect. "Good evening, ma'am," the security director said, his voice booming clearly over the ambient noise of the crowd. "Is the ambient temperature in the venue to your liking? Do you require a private viewing sector for the presentation?" Julian froze, his mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. His brain violently short-circuited as he stared at the massive security chief treating me like royalty. He looked around wildly, realizing that the dozens of armed guards in the room were now suddenly shifting their defensive postures to protect me, not him. Before Julian could piece together the shattering reality of the moment, the main ballroom lights dramatically dimmed to a pitch-black darkness. A singular, blinding spotlight illuminated the massive stage at the far end of the room. It was time. Marcus Sterling took the microphone first. He was visibly sweating, wiping his forehead with a silk handkerchief as he frantically hyped the revolutionary potential of the Smart City project to the sea of wealthy investors. He spoke rapidly, desperately promising unprecedented returns. Then, he proudly introduced the supposed architect of the future. Julian stumbled up the stairs to the stage. He looked pale and deeply rattled from our encounter, but the blinding spotlight and the applause seemed to reignite his delusional ego. He puffed out his chest, grabbed the wireless controller, and turned toward the colossal 50-foot curved LED screen dominating the wall behind him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice echoing through the massive speakers, "I am incredibly proud to initiate the core algorithm that I personally wrote to change this city forever." He dramatically pressed the activation button on his remote. The massive screen flared to life, displaying a slick, beautifully rendered 3-dimensional map of Austin. The crowd erupted into applause. Standing in the shadows at the back of the room, I reached into the interior pocket of my black suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I opened a sterile, black terminal application. I typed in a unique, 12-character execution command. I pressed enter. On the massive stage, the beautiful 3-dimensional rendering of the city suddenly froze mid-animation. A loud, piercing electronic screech tore through the sound system, forcing several guests in the front row to cover their ears. The giant LED screen violently flickered, flashing a blinding, emergency alert red. The slick graphical user interface completely shattered. It was violently replaced by an endless, cascading waterfall of raw, highly complex source code streaming down the 50-foot display. At the absolute center of the screen, flashing in bold, undeniable white lettering, the system broadcasted its true origin. A massive digital watermarking seal materialized, displaying the legally registered heavily classified emblem of Atheros Dynamics. Directly beneath the corporate seal, the screen flashed a permanent, glaring copyright mandate: primary architect and sole owner, Brooklyn Munoz. A deafening wave of shocked murmurs violently rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. Camera flashes exploded again, this time capturing the undeniable digital evidence of federal intellectual property theft. Chloe Sterling stood frozen near the front row, looking wildly from the flashing screen to her father in utter confusion. Marcus Sterling, however, understood exactly what he was looking at. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly embalmed corpse. The heavy glass of champagne slipped from his trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor with a sharp, violent crack that echoed perfectly through the sudden, suffocating silence of the doomed ballroom. The heavy, brass-studded oak doors at the rear of the ballroom swung open with a violent crash that instantly drowned out the murmurs of the stunned crowd. A perfectly synchronized formation of men and women strode into the room. At the front of the phalanx was the senior litigation counsel for Munoz Capital, clutching a thick leather briefcase. Flanking him were 6 federal agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters designating the Federal Bureau of Investigation emblazoned across their backs. They did not pause to scan the room. They completely ignored me standing quietly in the shadows. They marched directly down the center aisle, splitting the terrified crowd of tech elites and venture capitalists, and ascended the steps to the main stage. Marcus Sterling was still staring blankly at the massive screen, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The senior lawyer stepped right up to the microphone, tapping it once to ensure the entire ballroom was listening. Marcus Sterling, the lawyer's voice boomed coldly over the sound system. I represent Munoz Capital, effective as of exactly 8:30 this evening. Our firm has officially initiated an immediate margin call on the entirety of your restructured corporate debt. Due to explicit documented evidence of federal wire fraud and severe breach of contract regarding the collateral you presented for this venture, all grace periods are instantly nullified. We are executing total foreclosure on all commercial properties, residential estates, and frozen liquid assets under the Sterling portfolio. You are completely bankrupt. Marcus let out a strangled, pathetic sound. His knees violently gave out, and he collapsed directly onto the polished stage, burying his face in his trembling hands. The man who supposedly owned half the city had just been completely liquidated in less than 60 seconds, entirely erased by the bloodline of the exact woman his arrogant daughter had tried to throw out of a kitchen just weeks prior. Chloe finally broke from her state of shock. She let out a piercing, hysterical scream that echoed terribly in the cavernous room. She spun around, her face twisted in pure rage, and lunged at Julian. She slapped him across the face so hard, the sharp crack sounded like a gunshot over the speakers. You completely ruined us, Chloe shrieked, striking his chest with her closed fists. You absolute fraud! You lied to my father! You destroyed my family! Julian stumbled backward, raising his arms defensively. His face was a mask of absolute terror. He looked frantically into the front rows of the audience, desperately seeking the eyes of the mayor, the city councilmen, and the wealthy investors he had spent weeks courting. Every single one of them physically recoiled, actively stepping backward into the crowd, treating him as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. He was suddenly and entirely radioactive. Then, Julian's frantic gaze locked onto me. He scrambled off the stage, nearly tripping over the heavy audio cables, and sprinted blindly through the crowd. He threw himself at my feet, collapsing onto his knees on the cold marble floor. The bespoke navy suit he was so incredibly proud of was now rumpled and soaked in a cold, terrified sweat. Brooklyn, please, Julian begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. He reached out, desperately trying to grab the hem of my black suit jacket, but my security director instantly stepped forward, forcefully kicking his hand away. Julian sobbed, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. Please, you have to stop them. You have to tell them I did not mean to do this. I just made a stupid mistake. Brooklyn, please, I am your husband. I looked down at the man kneeling in front of me. I felt absolutely nothing. The anger was gone. The betrayal was gone. He was nothing more than an insect I had just stepped on. I leaned down slightly, ensuring my voice was low, steady, and perfectly clear. My father does not own this city, Julian, I said, my words dropping like shards of freezing ice. My family owns the people who believe they own it. 2 federal agents grabbed Julian by the shoulders, violently hauling him to his feet. They slammed his chest against the nearest glass pillar, swiftly pulling his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed with profound finality. One agent loudly recited his rights, officially charging him with corporate espionage, grand larceny of intellectual property, and interstate wire fraud. Across the room, 2 other agents were actively detaining Marcus and Chloe Sterling, informing them they were now under federal investigation as criminal co-conspirators. I did not stay to watch them drag my husband out of the building. I turned around, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and walked quietly out of the ballroom. 7 months later, I was sitting alone behind a massive desk in a completely silent, glass-walled office located on the top floor of the newly acquired Etherius Dynamics headquarters. It was exactly 10 o'clock at night. The sprawling, glittering skyline of Austin stretched out endlessly beneath my window. The legal proceedings had been swift and utterly merciless. Julian was currently serving a federally mandated sentence of 15 years without the possibility of early parole. The Sterling real estate empire had been entirely dismantled, sold off in massive, undervalued chunks to Munoz Capital subsidiary firms. Chloe and her father were living in a small, rented apartment on the desolate outskirts of the city, utterly buried under a mountain of insurmountable legal fees. I poured myself a single glass of neat bourbon. I raised the heavy crystal glass, watching the amber liquid catch the reflection of the city lights. I had my absolute freedom. I had my thriving, untouchable career. The revenge was completely finished. There was no lingering hatred left inside my chest. Only the cold, sharp serenity of a woman who had systematically burned a traitor to the ground just to clear the space to build her own throne. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. We hope you enjoyed it. As an ad-free channel, your support is what keeps us alive. Please support Zoe Revenge Stories with just $1 via the QR code on the screen, or click the link in the description box or pinned comment. Also, we would love to connect with you. Please leave a comment telling us which city or state you are listening from. Thank you for standing with us, and see you in the next stories.